Hi everyone, welcome to Surveillance Self-Defense Part 2. We're going to talk about anonymity on the internet, this time VPNs, ISPs, phishing, and malware. We're going to talk about fake news too and how to keep the internet safe. So if you weren't able to view Part 1 previously, you can subscribe to our newsletter. The links are on the chat, and we'll send you a link to the video. We'll have a question and answer portion later, and we can answer all of the questions on Slido later. This session is moderated by Filipino Freethinkers, an organization that promotes rational thinking, secular values, and evidence-based legislation. Dre, can you introduce DC2324? You're muted.
Hi. So a little background about DEFCON in general. It's the world's longest running and largest underground hacking conference. DEFCON groups are local gatherings of DEFCON hacker-minded folks looking to meet, and there are chapters in multiple countries around the world. Okay, and we're the local chapter DC2324.
Okay, so let's go to the first question. What is anonymity on the why is anonymity on the internet important? So some people are usually thinking they have nothing to hide, they're not doing anything illegal. So why should they be anonymous in their internet, and why should that option be available to the public?
Okay, so basically anonymity should be a basic human right on the internet, because there's a lot of things that anonymity will allow you to do. One of them is data safety. You have some control over data that you share with other people and how it relates back to your identity. People may consult about intimate topics, or they may discuss things that they're concerned about that they don't necessarily want attached to them. So giving up your anonymity is almost equivalent to allowing cameras and voice recording devices installed in your home and in various places, metadata about the time it takes for you to visit certain places. These are the things that you will be giving up when you give up anonymity. And though everyone thinks that, oh, I'm not a criminal, that doesn't mean that the data about you doesn't hold you up to judgment. So another problem is doxing and targeting by groups. So something as simple as your identity. Let's say that you are there's a whole Gamergate fiasco last time. So things like having an opinion will really just get you targeted if it's controversial enough. And what we want to encourage in this time is really discourse and the ability to share research, the ability to improve human knowledge. And if we give up anonymity, we're also giving up that right. Now, the other problem is this almost anonymity versus authentication argument. You have a lot of governments online that are deciding that we need to have national ID. And this is also a problem here in the Philippines, because they're also pushing for national ID. So how will that affect you? Now, national ID is very good for places like Estonia, where they've really digitized a lot of government processes, and people need to legitimately identify themselves in order to do business, in order to do day-to-day things. But there is a gap there where you're also suppressing the ability to discuss ideas. So those two things should both be available, in my opinion. But that isn't the opinion of the entire DCG, I'm sure. Okay.
Thanks. Red, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So there's also the situation that's going on in the world right now. It's surveillance capitalism. So I recommend reading a book by Shana Zuboff of the same title, Surveillance Capitalism. And we have the right to our data, as Dre mentioned. We have the right to all of our information. But without our consent, big corporations and governments are collecting information about us. Like, it's not outrageous to say that these corporations know more about ourselves than our closest friends and maybe even ourselves. And they use this information, of course, to make money, and they sell that information to whoever can pay for it. So corporations pay for it so that they can sell to us better, and governments pay for it so that they can manipulate us into thinking whatever is on their agenda or their propaganda. And this shouldn't be the case. We should have a say in what we do online and how much information that we share, which is why in certain places there's a GDPR, the Data Regulation Act, that the alerts that you see on mostly UK websites are there because it tries to prevent this sort of problem happening. So if you don't want your information to be sold, and if you don't want to be manipulated by corporations, by governments, or whoever can pay for your information, you should care about anonymity. You should care about your information. Back to you.
Okay, so let's move on to how can I publish online anonymously. So this includes, like, people want to know what is encryption, what are VPNs, what are Tor browsers, and yeah.
I think we really struggle to simplify such a complex topic. But I think the main things that people need to understand is probably stop using HTTP sites without HTTPS. I would also go into a little bit about what encryption is and how it works. And I invite all our other members to chime in because I'm going to struggle to simplify this. But basically what happens is SSL is really for two things. One is encryption, and the other thing is identification. And I think Fee would like to use a really simple example using Caesar ciphers, or like rotation 13 as a starting point to understand how encryption works.
Cool. Thanks, Jay. So when we talk about encryption, people often understand it as a means of protecting that information, right? If I encrypt it, nobody else can see that information that's being shared. But what does it actually mean to encrypt something? So I'm going to show you guys a really, super simple, it's not a practical application of like cryptography, right? But we're going to talk about a simple Caesar cipher called ROT13. And a Caesar cipher refers to a means of encryption where you basically shift the position of a letter to another one. And a very popular one is called ROT13. It's used, to sort of illustrate this concept. And you can see on my screen right now, it's a simple website, rot13.com, that you can play with at home. And what this does, basically, if I type in something like, hello there, this is a test, you can see here at the bottom, I don't know if that's visible, I'm going to try to zoom that in. It says, so what happened here? So when we say ROT13, that means rotate 13. And what that means is there are 26 letters in the alphabet. So we are basically pushing the letter A up into the 13th letter, which is in this case is N. And then B goes to O, C goes to P, and so on and so forth. And in this way, the text that is being passed, looks like nonsense. So how would the receiver get the original message? In this case, ROT13 is symmetric. What does that mean? It means it works in both ways. If I copy this and paste it here, you can see it turns back into the original text. So for many reasons, this is actually not a practical use of cryptography, although it's something fun to do if, maybe fun to teach your kids if they're trying to learn it at a young age, and something they can do with friends. But it illustrates, it's a good example of what cryptography is, which is obfuscating information and having some algorithm or a cipher or some means to obfuscate that, and having the parameter, in this case, shifting it 13 spaces to make sure that the recipient can decipher that information. So yeah.
So,
I think that's a good introduction. Jay, did you want to pick up from that?
sure. So in order to simplify the process about why this is important, what really happens is you have a client that initiates a connection to a server, says, I want a secure connection. And then the server will send back an encrypted public key certificate. The client, in this case, your machine, will check the certificate, create and they will create and send back an encrypted key. If this certificate is not okay, the communication fails. But if it is okay, the server will decrypt the key and deliver the encrypted content with the key to the client. And then your browser, the client, will decrypt the content, completing what we call the SSL/TLS handshake. Now, there are different strengths of encryption, which will be dependent on how secure you need it to be. And you'll notice that there are certain levels of compliance, depending if this is processing financial information. There's already software in the world that can decrypt this. It's used by, Tor is really useful for secure connections because it does all of that, but it actually does this by like a relay. Instead of having just this client server connection, it does like an entry relay and an exit relay. But if you're trying to protect yourself from agencies like the NSA, but then the NSA has had its tools released already, then it's not, Tor is not going to protect you. So how do you publish anonymously? So I would definitely look at things like the secure drop service. Different news agencies and all news agencies should set up a secure drop service. You will want to download and install Tor. For security reasons, don't ever use your home or work network. Use a public Wi-Fi network in an area where your screen is not visible to security cameras. We recommend starting up your computer from a USB key loaded with a secure operating system, maybe Tails, or whatever Linux flavor of your choice. And it includes the Tor web browser. Once you launch Tor from that disk, copy and paste the URL, the onion routing URL in the Tor address bar. When the page loads, you'll find further instructions on how to submit files and messages. You'll also, some of the news agencies might also generate a unique code phrase. If somebody wants to get back to you, they will leave a message for you in the secure drop. And the messages can only be accessed using your code name. So those messages are the one way that you can continue to publish information. So like an example of this is of using secure drop was very popularized by Mormon leaks. So they were trying to explain what was going on inside Mormon, the faith. So that was one use of it. I think Nico had a good point about don't publish anything online that you don't want to get back to you. Honestly, it's there forever, basically. Erasing yourself online is a huge, huge pain in the ass. And also you have to decide whether it's worth it. So what kind of personality, obviously your identity will always link back to you. So you have to be very careful about the kind of personality that you have online. So questions. Regarding anonymity, can you delete metadata attached to your identity? No, but the Data Privacy Act in the Philippines, I just wanted to correct something said earlier. So GDPR is actually for the EU. And with Brexit, there's going to be some difficulty with ensuring GDPR, but for now, that's going to be across that. But here in the Philippines, we have something called the Data Privacy Act. And technically, you are allowed to ask for any internet service here that falls under the DPA to delete your data. So that is your right. But problem is, it's a very fuzzy gray area, and the legal implementation is gray at best. So I don't think that we have proper implementation in this country. We also have a problem with DPA in this country in that the law itself is not very well done because we're actually holding the data privacy officer criminally liable for leaks, for not reporting. I mean, I understand maybe that sounds good on paper, but it's also not really the jurisdiction of a single person most of the time. It's an organization. And basically it's saying you have a scapegoat in the company for if issues get too bad. So it's a very complex topic. Yeah, do you guys have something to add?
I just wanted to, sorry.
No,
Can I
go ahead.
just add that some people think that like using a VPN will make it safe for them to do things online. Like, is that true? Like, does it really make it safe, or do they need to take other precautions?
So what a VPN does, that stands for Virtual Private Network. And what it does is it basically encapsulates, so you can think, well, everyone knows sort of what a network is, right? You've got your router, you've got your phone, you've got the broader internet. A network is basically, a system of connected computers. But when we talk about a VPN or virtual private network, it's like you're making an enclosed network within another one. So if you use like a consumer sort of VPN service, one that you can find on the App Store and Google Play, what that's basically doing is it's making another tunnel inside sort of your usual internet connection. So what does that mean? It means that parties, for example, outside that tunnel, cannot see what's going on inside that VPN. So as an example, your ISP, for example, if that's PLDT, that's Globe, that's Converge, they cannot see what's going on inside that VPN. If you're at a coffee shop, if you're using public Wi-Fi, if you're at an airport, the operator of that network cannot see what's going on inside that VPN. So in that regard, a VPN is safer, but there are other things to look out for, which is why we talked about the idea of having a threat model and knowing what it is you're protecting for. So that having a VPN protects you from your ISP and from the operator of the network, but it does not protect, for example, of disclosure from your own computer. So as an example, if you're using a VPN, but you're still using your personal account to post something, well, that's still your personal information that you're sharing. There's also the case that your ISP or the network operator might be able to tell that you're using a VPN at all. That depends on the particular technology and the provider. But in most cases, they will be able to tell that you have a VPN, just not what's going on inside. And what that means is they can then talk to the VPN provider if they can figure that out. So if they see that you're connected to a specific provider, they can ask that provider, hey, I noticed this connection from this time. Who was using it and what were they doing? And a lot of VPN providers have different policies on this. A lot of them will claim, we don't keep logs. A lot of them will claim your privacy is completely secure. And there are perhaps companies that do that. But we can't tell you which companies are completely secure or trustworthy. What you really have to do is look at the track record of each of these companies and look at their own incentives for running the service. As a good example, if the service is completely free, then that means they're paying for it somewhere else. Do they have a premium offer? Do they have something else? If they don't, then that's reason to be concerned. The second thing is there are services, for example, that don't require you to trust them. So as an example, there are some VPN providers that allow payments over completely anonymous channels. So for example, some of them accept payments via cryptocurrency, for example, via Bitcoin or something else. So that doesn't mean you're completely untraceable, but it's harder to trace versus if you were using a credit card. So does a VPN make you automatically safe? I would say no, but it is an additional layer of protection, but that is not, it's not everything. And if you don't take other precautions, like what Dre said, like not using your usual computer, not using your usual OS, not using your usual account, then a VPN doesn't really help you. It is only one part of like a complete toolkit. Did the rest of the panel want to add anything to that?
Sure. Actually, the most important thing, again, and I sound like a broken record, but is to just exert some basic common sense when you type or publish something. But going on the topic of VPN, for example, NordVPN had a huge breach just last year, and everything from server data to location, your passwords and everything was actually leaked out through NordVPN. Because what happens with VPN servers is they're actually this private server where you're connecting to. And in order to do that, there's actually a proxy and a certificate, right? And how that works is it decrypts it into their servers so that they can then re-encrypt it out. So within their servers, there's a chance that they're keeping text logs, hopefully not, or logs of the actual transactions that's happening. And although most VPN services say that they do not do that anymore, there were a lot before that did. So I would still have some caution with some VPN services and use only very known ones that are either in the EU, that's strongly regulated by the GDPR, for example, PIA. Their GDPR policies are very, very strict. So you want to look into those kind of VPNs and not just any VPN that's maybe in China or some Russian country. You just want to be careful with those things. That's it.
I also want to note that there are people here. I mean, just because it's a popular VPN, I want you to be very careful of some of them. An example is Hola VPN. So part of Hola VPN's end user license agreement is, it says in 2018, in return for free usage of this proxy, and you maybe appear on the Illuminati network. So they were actually selling your computing power as a peer in this network, and they had 35 million residential IP addresses and 2 million mobile IP addresses. Basically, you were part of their slave botnet network by just using their VPN. And I noticed people were using this to watch whatever in other countries, but that was very dumb. And you really need to check out what services you're using. I understand that there's many types of users who might be watching this. We don't want to recommend a single tool, but of course, the most secure is spin up your own. But I know that's out of the grasp of many users. But definitely research the controversies behind the VPNs that you do decide to use, because a lot of them are not what they seem.
Yeah. I think there was someone was asking about fingerprinting. Red, do you want to talk about that, or should I?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Fee. It's very much related to
You
what
can
you
try it out, actually. Yeah. We can link them to the Panoptic.
Oh yeah, if you could drop a link for that. But I'll go ahead and explain while Jay is dropping a link to that. So I mentioned that a VPN protects everything between you and the site that you're going to. I wrote down some notes here on the screen that you can see. But a VPN does not protect you from the site operator itself. It just means your connection to, as an example, to Facebook, to Twitter, to Tumblr, WordPress, wherever you are. It means that that's protected. But it means the operators of the sites that you go to may still be able to identify you. They won't know your original IP, for example. So if you're in the Philippines and you're connecting via VPN in Sweden, in Hong Kong, in Europe, doesn't matter. They'll see that, but they'll still see the connection from your computer itself. And when we talk about fingerprinting, that is a means of sort of identifying your specific machine or you via other pieces of data that your machine or you may disclose. So as an example, you might have seen websites, you go to them on the desktop, like on your laptop or your desktop computer, you have a full version. When you go to it on a phone, it might look different. And some sites are able to detect whether, you're in a mobile browser, you're in a desktop browser. Some sites detect what language your computer is set to, what resolution you have, what fonts you have, and so on and so forth. And these are good because they improve the experience, but it means that also those are pieces of information that can be used to identify you. So, for example, if a site says, this computer is running this OS, this browser, this font, has Flash enabled, has Java version whatever installed, they can sort of collect that and create a fingerprint of who you are. And it's particularly difficult because the more particular your computer is, so the more, for example, unique you are because you have certain fonts, you have certain plugins enabled, you have a weird resolution, or you have multiple monitors. Those are things that can be used to identify you better. So that is Andrea sort of listed a bunch of information there in a sample site run by the EFF. So VPNs, again, protect you from a lot of things, but not from fingerprinting. So one thing that you can do to protect yourself, again, VPNs are one part of that, but one thing that you can do to protect against fingerprinting specifically is to install software like ad blockers, like tracking blockers, or utilities that actually modify what your browser sends. And there's a lot that we can talk about. I'm not going to recommend any specific ones, but you might have heard of AdBlock, you might have heard of uBlock Origin, you might have heard of browsers like Brave, like Safari, that include some tracking protection. I'm not going to endorse any specific one, but I do encourage you guys to look into blocking trackers, blocking ads, and even software that can sort of fake your fingerprint. Like you're on a Mac, but it'll say you're running on Windows or you're running on Linux, or your browser is this other browser. There's Privacy Badger and Privacy Possum, two examples of that. But again, I'm not endorsing any specific one. These are just examples. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Red? I think you're muted.
That's really comprehensive. I think that it's not recognized as a threat, but it's actually a really big one because your browser fingerprint is enough to identify you. I mean, it can narrow you down to a degree that is troubling.
Okay.
So we don't want to just use tools, but be aware of the solutions. You also want to be concerned about search engines. Most search engines will track you.
DuckDuckGo is that.
What?
DuckDuckGo.
One.go?
DuckDuckGo.
Yeah, DuckDuckGo claims to not track you. So that's, I mean, we don't want people to just use tools. We want you to use tools and, oh, your VPN blocks the site. That's strange. I would be very concerned about VPN if it's blocking that site. Okay. Yeah, VPNs are not supposed to block.
So also, like from part one, someone was also asking, like, do you have a primer for using Tor browsers? Like, which one do you recommend? I know you guys don't like recommending certain brands, but like maybe you can point out to where people can start looking into it.
I would definitely use the base Tor to start off with.
Okay.
Literally, torproject.org is the place to start with. And then if you would like, it's also not just the browser. You also want to make the OS used for such communications more secure. So Tails stands for the Amnesic Incognito Life System. It's really built for that and has Tor baked in. The official webpage for Tails is this. But this really applies to people whose threat model really fits that. If you are a person browsing on the internet, you just have to think about what you're using it for and act accordingly. There are also some places where trying to use a lot of these tools will just invite more problems. And if you want to get to that level, I mean, you can have burner devices and just get rid of them. So actually that's one of the reasons why cybercrime is still more difficult here, because you have a lot of disposable SIM cards. Another thing is when you set up these services, if you are trying to remain anonymous, avoid SIM authentication. Because if ever like a telco was subpoenaed, I mean, they'll be able to triangulate network location from which towers you connected to, possibly. So I would look at that.
Okay. Do you want to move on, or is there something that you want to discuss still?
Before we move on, I got one thing to add in terms of the browser. If a normal person, just a layman, doesn't want to use Tor, is worried about their security, I don't work for Microsoft, but the new Microsoft Edge Chromium has a very strict security policy that you can enable that blocks every tracker that it can. And I think that's a very fascinating move from Microsoft. And I think every browser should start doing the same thing. So that is one thing that you guys can look at. Brave, to a certain extent, does that as well. But Brave has been, again, it's not as new as Chromium. So what's happening is there's a lot of layering in the code already. And there are a couple security flaws there, but it's still not too bad.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I think we can move on, Naman. I've been trying to write everything that's been said so we can share this document as well as slides
Thank you.
after this talk. Yeah.
Yeah, so next is, are my smart devices spying on me? So this also includes the Internet of Things, like what about smart devices such as Alexa or Google Home, smart air conditioning, refrigerators, TVs? Are they listening on you? What are your thoughts on this?
It's like its own talk, but let's go.
Who wants to start?
Sure, I'll start. So actually, this is one of my main research topics, right, at Team Red. And the question of, is my IoT device, whether it's Alexa or not, spying on me or not, the answer would be no. And that's because you agreed to it. You gave full agreement to letting them at your data, at what you say, and for them to actually study and read upon it. However, that doesn't apply for all IoT devices. For example, there are some light bulbs that are smart light bulbs, right? Like the Philips Hue. This is a great example. Now, Philips Hue, when it first came out, had zero encryption. So whatever password you put there, hopefully it's a independent password, is probably out there on the internet already. And that's all light bulbs. And the reason for that is because they don't use a specific chip, or the chip or the RAM or the eMMC used on these chipsets, or have such low capacity that you cannot even put a password to it or encryption onto it. So it's completely open. And one really interesting thing is there's so many IoT devices in the world today, and I love using IoT devices. I think they're fantastic. I use Alexa, I use Google Home devices, I have smart lights and all kinds of stuff, right? They're great to use, but at the back of my mind, there's always this fear of what if somebody gets at it or what's in it, and that's when threat modeling comes into play for most people. It's like, what can people glean off me? Am I a person of interest in something? But something interesting is, what is the biggest IoT devices you guys think is in the world? Anybody? Biggest size IoT device. Nobody.
Car.
A city.
A car.
A city.
A city. Yeah, that's really good. An entire city could be an IoT device. But actually, it's a 80,000 metric ton Panamax cruiser on the sea right now, and you have thousands of them, all on the ocean, and all with open protocols. And that's what's scary about it, because none of them are being updated. And all of these IoT devices we have up till today have not been cannot be updated. It's because their protocols do not allow them to be updated. So is your IoT device spying on you? Possibly, yes, but it's not the company. It's somebody else. Usually it's used in a botnet or somewhat. They're not really trying to go after your data privacy or whatnot. They're just trying to get that resource of that IoT device or product. Are there ways to protect yourself? Absolutely, yes. You can have firewalls or certain devices that could block communications from these products, yet still allow you to use it as it should be. I think that's a completely different topic already, more on security and firewalls.
Are there easier ways for regular people to check an IoT device if it's safe to use, or like it's not as shady as others?
I think one thing people have to keep in mind is when you buy an IoT product, as long as you buy something after 2018, and the reason why I say 2018 is because security has really been focused from 2018 onwards. People have started understanding the risk and the value of people's data and their devices. Companies have started putting better chipsets into their products so that they could be updated on the air, like OTA updating. So as a user, let's say I have a smart Samsung fridge, I want to make sure that the software there is updated all the time. If there's an update, I will tap that update now button. I won't wait for it. I will make sure my device is updated. And the same goes for my Android phone, my iOS, my Windows, my Mac. Any device that says it has an update or a security update, please by all means agree to it and do it immediately, unless it's from some shady company.
How would people balance it between, like, how sometimes updates have bugs or problems? Like, how do you think people should balance this?
If let's say on a Windows update, right? They've previously had some problems with the updates, like 2 years ago, where it started white screening people's computers. Maybe you can wait a week and see what people say about the update, and then look online, like just type Windows update date and then bugs or problems, right? If there's a lot of people reporting a bug or problem, I'll wait for a patch before I update something. But if it's an IoT device, specifically IoT products, I will update immediately if it says it's a security update, especially if it says critical security update.
Okay. Thank you. What about smartphones and the apps that you allow, or any other things that weren't covered in part 1?
Yes, smartphones are interesting because when you download an app, for example, let's talk about Cam Scanner because this just happened last year. When you download Cam Scanner, right, it's a great tool to be a scanner. You can scan a document and you can send it out immediately as a PDF or as a GIF or a JPEG. It's very helpful and useful. Unfortunately, Cam Scanner had a small problem where all of that data was actually being sent through to a server in China. And whether they knew it or not, that's besides the case. The service was compromised, and it asks when an app asks you for permissions, look at it very carefully. In the case of Cam Scanner, it asks for your live location. Why would a cam scanning app ask for your live location? Why would a cam scanner ask to record your audio on your phone? Why would a cam scanner ask to look at your contacts and your external storage on your phone? These are things that I would be wary of, and just be careful in general with any apps. Even Facebook Messenger. Facebook Messenger has this nasty way of looking at your usage pertaining to your contacts, and it's actually in their EULA. When you sign their service agreement, it allows them to use that. So I would use the Facebook app, but I won't use the Facebook Messenger app, for example.
Thank you. Dre or Philip or Pepe, do you have any other things?
Maybe to add, yeah, sorry, did you want to go, Dre?
No, please.
Yeah, maybe to add to what Nico said. So one of the things to note, I guess, is if you use any of these smart devices, as Miko said, you agreed to whatever data collection policy they have. So if you don't want yourself being tracked, don't have one. Personally, I also have a few of these devices because they are convenient. But understand again what sort of your threat model and what risks you're willing to share. So as an example, the Google Home and the Amazon Echo or Alexa, they have a copy of everything you say, right? So it becomes a matter of, do you trust them enough to have a copy of that? And for most people, you can sort of trust maybe the security of Google and Amazon insofar as you have insofar as you have a good password, maybe, insofar as you don't share your account with other people, then maybe that information with them is protected. But on the flip side, since they do have a copy of that, they could be subpoenaed, as mentioned earlier. Maybe a government agency or law enforcement can ask them for a copy of these things. So it's important, again, to sort of find that balance between what you want to use it for and what risks you're willing to take. So as an example, if you wanted to have the convenience of turning stuff on and off, but if you don't need to look up your calendar or book a ride or order things via your smart device, then you can make another account just for that, if automation is all you care about. The other thing I want to say or add to what Miko was saying earlier is, okay, let's take the assumption that you trust one of these devices, or at least trust it within the scope of the functionality that you want, whether that's automation. It's also important to know, especially in the context of updates, that it's not just about the manufacturer knowing stuff about you or listening to your voice. It's that if these devices are insecure, they can be used as, sort of proxies or relays by which other people can use to compromise these things. Sorry?
They're just way more likely. Like one of the most famous was like the Mirai botnet, and so many people were compromised by that.
Yeah. So, as a good example, I talk about, how the importance of this, and people say, okay, someone hacks into my light bulb. Who cares? They can flash my lights on and off. That's not such a big deal. And maybe it's not, but someone can use your light bulb as, part of a botnet. Your light bulb can now be sending spam emails. So you may be contributing to a larger problem. Or similarly, Pepe wrote this example where your fridge might be mining Bitcoin. Okay, that's annoying. Maybe that's bad, but it's not a big deal. But think about other smart devices. There are things like smart locks. There are things like cameras. There are things like, the smart speakers and microphones that where if they were compromised, that would be, a much bigger deal than just if it were spending out spam. So again, it's important to sort of recognize the risks you take. A lot of the same advice we give in previous questions in the previous session apply. Partition things off that are not as important. Just things I want to add
I also want to point out that devices alone are not the only problem here. Just visiting websites, by visiting a website, your processing power could be used to mine for crypto coins. So, I mean, we have found a lot of sites locally that were compromised that way, and they were reported, but unfortunately, that's really common. And to drive home how prevalent this is, you don't really understand how many things are actually insecure. One frightening example is the hackable cardiac devices from St. Jude. So basically, you have these implantable cardiac devices, and it could allow a foreign hacker to access the device, and once they can deplete the battery or administer incorrect pacing or shocks, and that's like an untraceable issue, because how are you going to trace that action, right? The other one is the Vtech scandal of some years ago, because I'm not sure how many of the kids have a Vtech device, but these were like devices that kids could call their parents on, and it was actually recording information about them, and it was investigated, and they actually found recordings of kids talking to each other, and the gray hat hacker revealed it. But it was a huge scandal, but people don't stop buying these devices. So I really agree with the group. It's like you have to patch frequently, patch often. Another thing is the use of this in warfare, because a lot of tech that's on Navy ships is old. And sometimes we have protection because of the fact that we don't have an up-to-date system, because the systems that we're using are manual, but in some countries, a lot of the software is almost never patched because the military doesn't think that it's a concern. So it's a huge thing. It's not just personal consumer protection. You have to think about the entire landscape of devices.
Just to add, just final note on the topic, the light bulb example is very good, because from the light bulb, it could be used as a staging point to actually do a port scan of your entire network and then find further devices. And what if it finds a camera, a baby cam, or your Alexa, and there's a vulnerability that is then, exploited. These are definitely possible situations. So if there is a particular product that you have purchased and there's no updates coming in ever for it, I would actually get rid of it. Use a product that's probably somewhere from the EU with strong GDPR security, policies, because they don't have a choice, right? Because they can get sued very hard by the government in the EU for any exploits or any vulnerabilities. That's one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these things, because even cameras as early as 2014, 2015, I was asked to check a certain set of cameras, and when I contacted the manufacturer, they told me that none of their update software would work on it anymore, and this was only in 2019. So, the landscape is very disparaged from 2018 onwards and 2018 beforehand. It's just changed a tremendous deal just because people have started understanding the implications of IoT devices.
Also, it's a favorite thing of offensive bots to do is that they will find IoT network devices that have their default credentials set up. So aside from just patching off them, you need to change the passwords on your admin panels because that is the most common way in. This is stuff that you don't realize how many people have access to nowadays. I think there's so much tooling that is crazy, but things like network scanning, like I see some people, they're just using like Nmap, SMB client, LDAP search, and Firefox, and they can already get a lot of mileage out of that. Yeah.
Okay, can we just add something about FOSS? Like, Red, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so Internet of Things, like all of these smart devices, are no different from any other device, and like your computer or your smartphone. So there are free and open source alternatives to the popular software that you are using. Like even for the smart devices, like the free and open source alternatives for those are developing. And you can look into installing those instead of the ones that come bundled into it. Because if it's proprietary software and there's no way for you to check, or for other developers that you trust to check the code, you don't really know what's happening to your data. Like you will just have to take their word for it. And I don't know about you, but there's a lot of reasons that we shouldn't trust big corporations with our data. It's been proven time and again. Like Dre has mentioned, a lot of scandals over the years that have happened. And the only real way is if you can check the code. And free and open source software is one way to do it. Like we should support that movement. We should donate to them. We should install them and use them as much as we can, because it should be the norm rather than some obscure thing that only a few people use. The people who are interested in security and privacy. Free and open source software are improving all the time, and we should consider them at least and be aware that they are a viable alternative now. Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to the next topic? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. How can I protect my data and privacy from ISPs or when I'm outside? So this includes free Wi-Fi outside, internet cafes, free USB charging at airports. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the most basic thing, and this was actually explicitly discussed earlier, was to use a VPN. A VPN, again, will protect people on the same network from seeing what you're doing. But it's, again, just one part of a broader thing. One of the things, siguro, to add to what was said earlier, is that, for the better, a lot of sites have already started using or shifting to HTTPS. Meaning to say, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the usual, Gmail, Google, all of the usual sites use already have SSL or HTTPS enabled by default, which means that even without the VPN, the contents of that cannot be seen usually by like the network operator or by the ISP. So that's a good thing. What they would still be able to see is that, oh, you're connecting to Google, oh, you're connecting to Instagram, oh, you're connecting to Facebook. They just wouldn't be able to see the contents. So a VPN would protect from that. But again, all of the earlier caveats that you said about fingerprinting, about your browser, about your OS still apply. Now, one of the things, how should I say, one of the more critical things maybe to watch out for, besides the network operator, is other physical aspects in these spaces that you may want to consider. So a good example, I guess, is you might have seen like free chargers, free USB ports where you can plug in your phone. And that's great because, I'm low bat, now I can charge my phone. But what's dangerous, or what some people may not realize, is that the USB port on a charger is the same as a USB port on the phone physically. So you might think that you're plugging into a charger, but you might actually be plugging into like a small computer that might then try to exfiltrate data from your device. Good example is you might see a charger point. You plug your phone into it, and it will start charging. But in reality, it's already trying to connect to your phone and pull data out for it. So I actually think that's not super common locally, and for that to happen, you have to be relatively targeted. So I wouldn't really consider this as part of like the usual person's threat model. But if you do expect yourself to be a particularly targeted person, be wary about where you charge your phone. Be wary about charging it into someone. You might plug into someone else's laptop to charge it. That's fine if you trust this person or if you feel this person is secure. But if you don't know this person and you don't trust them, maybe don't use that. Other physical aspects to watch out of are the people surrounding you. Again, you might have a VPN and that's protecting you from the network, and maybe it's not the operator of the internet cafe or the coffee shop or the ISP that you have to worry about. Maybe it's other people on the same network as you. Maybe it's the person next to you on the next table, or maybe it's another actor that just so happens to be on the same network that might be following you. So one of the things that these people can do, especially that you're on the same network, is try to scan your machine for vulnerabilities. It's a lot harder to do that from the internet because you're usually sort of protected by, not directly, but by sort of the router in between you and the broader internet. But if they're on the same side of you, on the same side of the router as you, meaning to say they're in the same local network, then they can possibly try to scan your machine for vulnerabilities. If you have file sharing enabled or screen sharing enabled on your computer, they can try to look into that. So it's important, especially number one, to make sure your computer is up to date. As Nico said earlier, we can't stress that enough. To make sure that you don't have programs running on your computer or services running unnecessarily. So you might have remote login, you might have screen sharing, you might have file sharing enabled. If you don't need that, don't enable that, especially when you're out in public. And of course, as Pepe mentioned, also look out for people, very, very basic stuff. People looking over your shoulder, just to look at your screen or keyboard as you type in your passwords, or just look at what you're doing. Even the very most basic thing of watching what you're saying, whether you're on the phone or speaking to someone else. I have inadvertently been privy to a number of what I would expect are private conversations or sensitive conversations, just because there was a party in the next table talking about something sensitive. They didn't think that I would care, that I'm unimportant, and maybe I don't care, that's true, but it's still like, I shouldn't be knowing this private information that you're talking about your company or whatever it is. So just be very aware of like the physical sides of things, right? You might think, okay, I'm in a VPN using public Wi-Fi, but also don't forget the physical aspect, right? One thing when I'm talking about charging, if you do want to take advantage of public chargers, you can get cables that are power only. So as an example, I do have cables that don't transfer data, they just transfer power. It was annoying because I was trying to connect my PS4 controller to my PlayStation and it wouldn't work. And I was like, why isn't it working? Then I realized there's no data here. But in this case, it would be good to use for when you're in public, because then you know for sure that it can't transfer data. It will just charge your phone. So yeah, I think, is there anything the rest of the panel wants to add?
Yeah, just one quick addition. Again, we can't stress enough that you should never, ever take a USB drive or from a stranger, or even somebody that might have picked it up somewhere. I give you an example. The Iran hack on their nuclear site was because somebody plugged in a bad USB drive into their computers, and that blew up their nuclear reactor. So if they can do that there, I mean, a simple USB drive is all it takes, really, to compromise any device. So be careful with USB drives. Don't plug it into a printer or anything, especially if it's your office or your home. Another thing that I think was mentioned earlier is also when you're looking at, when somebody's looking over you, right? Just be aware of your surroundings. If you get a call from a bank and you're trying to verify a transaction, don't do it outside in public. Go somewhere private. Go to, I don't know, go look for a private area where no one can hear you, the security questions you're answering to, because you never know who might actually use that. Just a couple tips there.
I'm also seeing a lot of incidents here locally with social engineering. So the problem with the Philippine context is we're very new to e-wallets, right? So on your phone, you've got maybe PayMaya, you've got maybe the BPI or the BDO app. You also have, what else? You have Gcash, you have GrabPay. These are all ways that you can pull money out of a virtual space and into the real world. So the problem with this is I've been seeing a prevalence of incidents where people will try to pretend to be a technician or ask for your SIM card or say, oh, I need to actually get access to your phone. This is something that I've seen IRL. And what they'll try to do is then take your device and transfer funds to them. So how are you going to get about this? Honestly, for lay people, for most people, they're pretty secure about how they operate, and they don't really, because with the coronavirus, everyone's pretty secluded, but it's still happening. So you still have these people. So what these people try to do is they try to do like privilege escalation, and both through social engineering and both through network engineering. But in social engineering, that's when they'll share details that they might know you, or they're in a position of authority, or that you should help them because they're in trouble. So these are the things that cause them to get closer to you. The next thing is, once they get closer to you, they'll then try to take your devices. So this is going to be the most prevalent form of in-person crime. So how can you protect against that? Unfortunately, OTP is not a protection when your phones are also the devices that are generating the OTP. So that's something to really watch out for. I would honestly, if you can, just disable phone authorized banking if you do find yourself in spaces where you'll have to interact with other people. Another thing is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to add on to that, an ISP or your telco will never come to your house to check on your cell phone, ever. So if that happens, you know, something funny is going on, because the protocol there is for you to actually go to one of their server sites, or the actual Globe or PLDT or whatever telco you got your SIM card at. You have to go to them if your SIM card is faulty. They're not going to send somebody to you. So if somebody is there saying, I need your SIM card, I'm here to run a diagnostic because you called so-and-so, you want to be careful of that, and you want to check with your telco first.
So like the really common technique, what people will do is they'll try to, if they're trying to get into a space, is pretend like they work there. And then some people even pretend to be pen testers to really gain access to a space. Like, yeah, no, I'm just checking the security of the place. And they'll have a number, and some people will be dumb enough to call the number on the card instead of calling their own supervisors. So that's how, like, if you're working at any place that holds data, you've got to be really careful about who, I mean, whether you work at a call center or an ISP, or you work in a firm, you have to be very aware that these are the more common ways, because we like to think that sophisticated tech actors are interested in us, Most of the time, they're not. So you're more likely, like the average Filipino is more likely to be social engineered or targeted by a botnet than a sophisticated actor like spending time on you, unless you have information that is really interesting. Aside from USB devices, there's also all sorts of toolkits. Like the USB devices can inject the payload, and you'll never know they're there. So basically, you insert it, and then you take it out, and then that's it. You're compromised. It's not like they left it plugged in. The other thing is you can also, there's now new devices. They can capture HDMI input. They can also like be careful of people installing things on your network. If you work in a company that deals with financial data, there are lots of people that the thing is there's complacency. You think also that because you haven't heard that you were hacked, that you're not hacked. That's not true. So a lot of people will put in these exploits and just sit on them for years. So just expect that anything you share with the outside is another part of your threat model.
Okay, so since we're on this topic already, can we also discuss how people can protect themselves from scams, phishing, and malware? Dre?
Yeah.
Philip?
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
probably
go ahead, Dre. Yeah.
the first thing to do is probably look at the data you send out. So like an easy consumer tool that some people use is maybe Trails Proxy, or basically just look at your network activity and see what kind of information your device is transmitting. There are many tools for inspecting your network traffic. Go ahead, Pete.
To add maybe besides that, a lot of the things that we, that we discussed previously still apply. One of the points that we talked about in the last session last week during the end of it was to be aware of what information specifically you're sharing. A good example of that is if you know that you're likely to be a target, for example, if you're an activist or a dissenter, and maybe you post a lot of particular comments, it's good to be aware sort of, we talked about the threat model and everything, but it's good to be aware of that risk and be willing to and be aware of, if you have this particular persona, it's more likely that people are going to send you links in an attempt to capture information from you. So as an example, you might run a particular advocacy social media page or account. And obviously you take in messages from people from the public, who ask you for help or want to signal boost a particular initiative or something like that. But it's equally likely that, not equally likely, but it's also possible that someone can send a more maliciously crafted link. And then when you click on that, that can be a page that's constructed to look like, some official page. I think it's good to take a step back and define what phishing is. So it's spelled here as phishing, but really it's alluding to phishing, as in, fishing for fish. And the metaphor there is that you're trying to trick people into giving out information or to get information from them that they would otherwise not get out. And a good example of that is maybe a more common example that you've seen are fake emails from people where they claim to be your bank's website, and then they're asking you to validate something or to validate a transaction, and then you'll be tricked into, into entering your login information or your personal information. Or sometimes you might see emails from Apple supposedly, or Google or Microsoft asking you, hey, you need to validate your Apple ID or your Microsoft ID for whatever reason. One of the very important things, and this is why all of these services say, nobody from any of these companies will ever ask you for your password, because they're trying to avoid a specific thing from happening. So again, it's very important to sort of recognize, number one, if you are a person who's more vocal or a person of interest, they are more likely to send you targeted things. But even if you're not, people still try to cast wide nets. They still try to send mass fake emails or spam, in other words, or they will try to send. There's this example shared on chat where you might have link shorteners, and they're good because they make link shorteners, but that means that these links can go anywhere. So when you click on a link shortener, it's important to look at the URL that the link shortener actually went to. And that's a lot easier on a desktop because you can see the URL path completely. But on a mobile device, be extra careful of that, because on a mobile device, the screen is much smaller, so you might not be able to see the URL. So that is another thing to validate, especially when you're following links blindly. There was also, again, from the last session, a piece of advice where if you have something to validate with the company, so again, whether that's your telco, your bank, etc., a good way of making sure is to go to that company's, whether that's your bank or your telco, to go to their site or to call them and then validate, hey, I got this call or this email or this person wanting to validate this so-and-so thing. Because that's another way sort of protecting yourself from those kinds of phishing attacks. What else? It also goes to say, I guess, if you run, a lot of advice was given previously about separating or having another account or having another machine or another connection for doing these sorts of sensitive things. If you do, again, run sort of an advocacy account or something like that, it would be helpful to not log into that from the same computer or the same browser or the same device that you use for your personal stuff. Because if, for example, they manage to make you click on a link from one of those and they know that you're anonymously running this thing, but you click on a link while logged into like your advocacy account, whatever that may be, that might run something or that might go to a page that might trick you into divulging information about your personal thing. So again, as much as possible, sort of try to segregate that wherever possible. Is there anything the rest of the panel wants to add before I go?
Yeah, sure. I just want to focus on 6 psychological triggers that phishing scammers and scammers in general use. And when I talk about phishing, don't only think about emails, okay? Social media is valid for phishing as well. The first psychological trigger is authority, right? Whether it's coming from your boss or somebody like, say, a telco or bank that emails you and says, hey, you have to do this so and so and so in order to validate your phone number, for example. The second trigger is scarcity. So I'm sure a lot of people here has gotten those, you won $10 million and go to this link right now to get your $10 million. Please don't. That goes to the greed and scarcity factor, and they use that to fish for your data. Usually it comes out to put your PayPal account here and then we'll wire the money in. That's not going to happen. Another thing is commitment and consistency. Now, this is a very new thing. This has only began about, say, I think this year actually during this lockdown. What happens is, I think in the previous chat we've talked about have I been pawned. Now, there's a password list there that you can download. And what happens is that's tied to a particular email at times. These scammers are then going to email you saying, hey, I've phished your password. I've hacked your computer. This is the password. And here's a Bit wallet address that you have to pay me to, or I will send all your videos and whatnot to people. Now, those are phishing scams. They're actually just looking at old passwords. So if you've changed them, you're safe, and they don't really have access to your accounts. So just make sure you don't click on anything that they put in those. Another thing is the liking. Liking is another trigger that's commonly used in social media. One of those, let's do 10 push-ups thing, and then you like, and it actually brings you to, say, one of those Facebook apps that's actually trying to get your data. So you want to be careful with that. Reciprocation is one of those. Remember the ice bucket challenge? There's a lot of those challenges happening, right? So some of those things are actually an attempt to get a video of, say, your surroundings to understand who you are, or try to get video data. And again, the last one is, again, on social media. This is called social proofing. So it says, what's the last 10 books you've read, or what's the 10 most favorite books you've read recently? And that could actually be used as your secret kind of answer to some questions, right? And some of these are like your 5 top pets. So if they find out you like dogs, the chances of you having a dog is high, and then you've already been fished for information. So yeah, I just wanted to share these 6 things that would be good to watch out for.
And that, I guess, brings us back to part 1, where you may want to use a password manager.
Yeah. We talked about this, last time, but for the benefit of people that were not around, again, be very wary of the information that you share. Really great example shared by Miko, stuff like, what car did you learn to drive on? What was your first pet and what was its name? What street did you grow up on? Or even stuff like, find out your special name, if you take this month and this day of your birthday, your sort of name is blank blank, right? And these are sort of subtle ways that people can sort of trick you into disclosing information about yourself, or information that might be used as a security questions. It's also important, again, to note about some of the conscious things that you do. So like, again, as an example, I'm not using a Zoom background. You can sort of tell, okay, this is what the background of my living room looks like, but that's fine because I know that I'm not doing anything else. But if you expect to be sharing a lot of content and you want to be careful about that, be careful about things like that. Be careful also about if you share posts about, maybe you're comfortable sharing posts about, for example, the inside of your home. You think, hey, check out this new sofa I bought. Make sure that you're also not inadvertently sharing the location of that photo, because then people will know where you live. So again, it's a lot of being wary about, being careful about the data that you share or that you disclose. Sorry, Jay, were you saying something? Did I interrupt?
No, not at all. That was perfect. I also wanted to add something. So Miko gave a really good example earlier for phishing. Phishing, like people pretending they have access to your account, and then they're getting more information from you. But what happens when they actually do have real access to your account and they've locked you out? And actually ransomware is a lot more prevalent, and this can be almost deadly in places like hospitals, where or cities where ransomware can be super disastrous. And I know that we do have some tech professionals watching. And one thing that I want to really push for is offline backups. Because when you make an offline backup, that backup should not be connected to any network. Defeats the point. Because possibly you've already been compromised. You should back up often and regularly. And you should spend a lot of time on that if that data is valuable. So any organization listening now, like, do you have an offline backup policy? That would be are you protected from ransomware? I think that like one thing we haven't mentioned is that cybercrime, though we hate the term cybercrime, is super on the rise in the time of COVID-19. It's exponential in how it's grown. It's because a lot more people are online, and those people online are vulnerable. And it's also why we wanted to do this talk. I know that like people like Miko have donated so much of their time over the years to these advocacies, and he's not going to toot his own horn, but I want to mention his company has also made an internet security device, and one of the things that it does is that it allows you to see the sending of data to some untrusted sources, and it updates that database regularly. So looking at internet security appliances like that one, like Pangolin, is something that you really want to do, because the problem is there are just too many IoT devices now. And it's not like, I think that if I passed on this information to a layperson, that would be great, but they don't really have the means or the energy or the focus to spend a lot of time on this. So you do want to give yourself a checkup. Like if you have a health checkup, you also need to give yourself an internet security checkup pretty often.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the next topic? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So what can you do to prepare for being in a space where someone might force you to open your devices? So this is, as Ken mentioned in the chat, like what about cases of domestic abuse, or your parents are asking for your devices, or let's say you want to attend a mañanita? What are the things that you can do to prepare your devices and yourself?
So this, I think, is one of the most difficult questions to answer, particularly because a lot of people say that, you know, the physical device is like your last line of defense, right? A lot of people say if people have physical access to your device, then, you know, then it's over, then you're pretty much compromised. We don't want to be so defeatist, right? But it is a strong sort of reminder that if you can, you know, having a burner device would be good. We realize, of course, that this is not, how should I say, this is not practical for a lot of people. Phones can be expensive. But if you can plan ahead of time, and if you do have the capacity to do so, having a burner device, like an extra phone that you specifically use to go to a party or celebration, would be very good to have. Because once people have your phone, right, people like to talk about security, having good passcodes, etc. But then at the end of the day, you can be compelled to disclose stuff about, you know, your device. There's this, you know, popular comic, XKCD is like a very popular nerd comic, and you might have heard or seen a lot of comics from them. But, you know, there's this very popular and relevant comic where, you know, security nerds like to think, oh, you know, I have the best encryption on my device. It's got, you know, 4096-bit RSA here, right? I've got a 100-character password, and all that is good. But ultimately, if someone is pointing a gun to your head and saying, unlock your device, type in your password, there's not much you can do about that. So ultimately, if you can segregate that, if you can afford to, if you have the capacity of getting a separate device in situations where you know that you might be forced to disclose that, then get one. If not, and if you can expect, if you can hope that no one's going to try to beat you up, for example, encrypting your devices is always good. We've talked about encryption before and what that is, but Android devices, you can turn that on I think, Android 7. I think that's Lollipop, and later you can enable device encryption. You can check that on in your device settings. Do note on lower end devices, it makes the device a bit slower. Apple, I think, has included encryption by default for a long while, since I think iOS 5 maybe. Can't remember specifically as an example, but pretty much most modern Android phones and all modern iPhones support encryption. For your desktop or your laptop, on Windows there is what's it called, BitLocker. On macOS there is FileVault. On Linux you can use software like VeraCrypt, formerly known as TrueCrypt. There's also Lux, Luks, that you can use. So you can encrypt your passwords on, you can encrypt the drives on your devices, whether that's your phone, your laptop. Again, that will only protect against someone trying to actively type in the password if you're compelled to do so. That may or may not be much use. There are some cases, there are some pieces of information, some pieces of software that would allow you to type in a different password or passcode, and then that would show maybe a different volume or different information inside. I know, for example, VeraCrypt and TrueCrypt have this functionality, right? But there's very little of that on phones, for example. I've seen software like that for phones where you can have two passcodes. One is your real one, and the second one is like a fake one. It will show different things. But I don't recommend those unless you know what you're doing, because a lot of them either require your phone to be rooted, which is a security vulnerability, or jailbroken, which is also a security risk. One of the things that you can do, maybe, which is not the real protection, but if it's just like you're protecting against someone casually forcing you to like disclose information on your device. On Android, you can have multiple profiles now. I think since Android 7 and later, I think. It's like accounts on your computer where you can have different accounts. So you can have one account that is like your personal account where you have your personal stuff, and maybe a second account where it's just text, or maybe a different identity or a different number on WhatsApp or Signal or what have you. I don't consider that real security, because ultimately if someone gets your device and then they dig around enough, they'll find out that it's not your real account. But if you're trying to protect against very spot checks or casual things, it's very, that might be like your best bet. But again, I don't count that as real security. Did the rest of the panel have anything to add?
Yeah, I got one quick tip. For Android, you can actually create a shortcut to do a full wipe and reset on your phone. But be careful not to tap it. If you tap it and that wasn't the time, that's everything gone. Everything on your phone is gone. So if you're really worried about these things, create a shortcut on your Android for the full phone wipe and reset that will write zeros to the drive of the phone, and you should be good to go. Just be careful.
Yeah.
I also point out, like, there's a lot of people who think that they should get these fancy phones that have an operating system that's secure. I mean, that's silly. I think you can get a lot farther with a disposable device. Also, I mean, of course, the immediate advice is to have encryption to set a password. Do not use your biometrics to secure it. Don't use your face to secure a device if you're really trying to secure it. The problem is, if you bring your regular device to these things and you do get arrested and you're asked to unlock it, you may be charged with obstruction of justice. Or basically the situation is that whoever is holding you hostage, whether that's kidnappers or authorities or whatever figure is holding you hostage, they can basically compel you to, against your own will, to reveal that information. So the best security you really have is not having that data at all. If you're discussing things with other people, maybe you shouldn't know who they are. And you should be very careful about what you reveal to these people. So, like, trust no one, and there's no better security than a disposable device. There are some, I mean, I don't think that the threat in the Philippines is so high for actors that will really single people out. There are, but I mean, for the average attendee of this talk, I'm hoping that's not you. But I guess it's always look at the situation, adjust accordingly. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Chi,
I wanted to add to what you said about biometrics. A lot of phones have face or fingerprint-based unlocking. They're not good to rely on as a personal sort of security or like as your first line. But the reason they exist is so that hindi ka matamad to type in your passcode every time, right? Because before Face ID and Touch ID, I knew people who purposefully did not leave a passcode on their phone because it was just too much hassle. So insofar as it makes things more convenient for you, I actually think Face ID and Touch ID are a good thing. That said, it is, as Dre mentioned, a good way that people can compel you. Like maybe you say, I don't want to give you my password, but if they shove your phone in your face, then, or if they force your finger on your device, there's not much you can do to protect against that. So in as much as I encourage it for day-to-day use, I do really encourage it for day-to-day use, in fact. Disabling it before going to a very well-attended party on the streets would be a good idea. The other thing that you can do, and this is advice specific to iOS, maybe you forgot, or maybe it just so happens to be on, and maybe suddenly you're accosted by someone and you want to quickly disable that. For iPhones that have a Touch ID sensor, you can quickly hit your power button 5 times, and that will disable Touch ID. On a Face ID enabled phone like this one with a notch, you can hold down your home and your volume and your power button at the same time for 2 seconds, and that will also quickly disable Face ID. So in the event that you have either of these conveniences enabled and you want to quickly disable it, one of these 2 tricks will work. Spamming the power button 5 times on Touch ID devices and holding power and volume, one of them, for 2 seconds will disable that very quickly. You'll see it when you see the lumabas yung medical ID and yung emergency sliders, then you'll know it's also been disabled. So that is one thing that I can add to that point.
Okay, thank you. And let's move on to the next question. How can we keep the internet safe? So we've talked about anonymity online and publishing online anonymously. How can we check if things online are real or fake? How can we take down fake news?
So I guess the first thing to do is look at what sources those things amplify. You can, for example, there are certain news networks, if you can call them that, dedicated to spreading fake information. And you have to be very aware of what are the other sources they're trying to amplify, what accounts those accounts have also liked, and also if, for example, the news is coming from a Facebook account, how old is that account? And is this like, do the posts look real? If it's a news source, what are the other news sources that it's referring to? And are these sources trustworthy? It's a really tricky problem because what these news sources really try to get you to do is fall into a silo of information. Their job is to convince you that this worldview that they're pushing is the real worldview. So they'll link to other sources, but actually all those sources are also the same sources. So they're trying to create this entire network of fake news, basically. The way to do it is to support the freedom of press, to look at where they're getting their data from, to understand the agenda. And if you're willing, you should follow the money. For every news agency that you're using, you should understand their profit model. At the end of the day, it comes down to a problem of capitalism and control. You are basically the product. They want to know things about you so they can sell to you. They also want to buy your viewpoint. And now with the digital world, you are for sale. So that is going to be the problem that's just going to get worse over the years.
I think it's also helpful to look at if this is something on social media. Do a quick, rudimentary search on who are the actors or agents that are sharing this information. That might give you a hint as to what the motives might be underlying this particular campaign. It's very easy to just find something viral, scratch the surface, and look, it's 10 bots. The first 10 accounts that I check are bots. So how do I say these are bots? Well, they're just sharing, the same thing with the same hashtag. The account was active for 2 days ever, throughout the entire lifetime. So it's kind of easy to tell in that sense. So that might be helpful as well.
There's also networks that create these accounts, but they also keep them for years. So, we know that happens. And basically, just the account age is a good indicator, but it's not the complete indicator that you're dealing with a troll or a bot.
I think to add to that, one thing people can look at is what was their last post. Somebody tried to friend me recently. He was really my friend. And his last post was in 2015. So that's a red flag. If somebody tries to get in touch with you and through that, you should be kind of thinking, why all of a sudden? Turns out his account was compromised in 2015 and he used a different account. And sometimes people actually use these compromised accounts and they're online for sale on the black market. So just be careful, look at when was the last post, because it might have just been dormant and somebody bought it.
Yeah, while we're on the topic of people using and abusing or manipulating accounts, there have been I think last year or the year before, there was this sort of trend where people were making accounts or there were accounts that sort of predicted major things happening, right? Whether it's the turnout of basketball games or the turnout of elections and stuff like that. And then they would use that evidence as a point to, hey, this account tweeted this thing 5 years or 2 years before this event happened. So they probably have trustworthy information. This, I think, is part of like being very, critical about looking at the information you posted and how these things work. And as it turns out, a lot of these social media accounts that try to do this, one of the things that they did apparently was they made a private account that no one could follow. So all of the posts were hidden. And then they just made tweets for every possible outcome. So they made tweets that this team won, this team lost, this politician win, this politician lost, or all of the different combinations. And then when the event would happen, they would delete the ones that were wrong, and then they would make the account public, right? So in a way, it looks like, wow, they had insider information because they were able to predict these things. But in reality, they were just sort of, how should I say, playing the system and playing around the limitations. So I use this not as an example of like fake news per se, but I use it as an example of how you have to think a little critically about how some of these platforms work and how some people might come to these pieces of information. So it does, it's a good example of being skeptical and applying that sort of critical thinking around certain kinds of publishing.
What about taking down fake news? Like, are there ways to verify these things? Are there ways to report them?
So that's tough because ultimately the person, the entities capable of taking down content are the entities in control of that content ultimately. So as an example, if you post stuff on Facebook or on Twitter, the only people that can take those down are Facebook or Twitter. And what's frustrating, of course, is that, as we've seen, Facebook and Twitter have not always had the best policies around this, right? Like Facebook very popularly has said they will not be doing this sort of like fact-checking on posts. They will only pull down posts if they're against sort of community standards, quote unquote. And a lot of those community standards have to do with things like harassment, libel, people's personal information, stuff like that, which are all good. But if you're careful about it and you don't target anyone personally, it makes it hard sometimes to like have these posts pulled down. It's also another point if it's not on one of these social media sites, or if a person actually owns like their own domain, their own website, then that becomes a possible point of difficulty as well. Because if they don't, if for example it's a comment on a website, you might be able to message the website owner and say, this comment is wrong or something like that, if it's like a guest editor or something like that. But if they own that website, then it becomes a lot harder to actually pull that article or post down. Is there anything the rest of the panel wants to add on this topic?
I think that we're not powerless. I think that the problem is right now, like, I think the theme of this year was a fake DEFCON. It was supposed to be a discovery. It is not. I mean, that's not happening. By the way, like, for people who care about that, both DEFCON in Vegas and China are going online, and they're not holding the physical events. But you're not powerless. You can take down some sites. If you can prove that this site is spreading fake information, there are many ways that you can work together to disable such sources of information. There are many things that these sites use to make their space known. So one way we took down one site was, this is like we had a website that was pretending to be our site before. So what we did was we found out, you can actually use Whois to find out who's behind a site. And then even if you don't know who's behind the site, let's say they've hidden the information, but if you're lucky, they'll have some information there, and you can find out who's behind that domain. The next thing you do is, just by running the Whois, you know who their domain registrar is. Now, what we did before was we worked with the domain registrar directly. And of course, they get thousands of these requests. But basically what you have to say is, hey, this is the impact you're having on our country. This is the the fake news that is absolutely unsupported, like the site is promoting, you have to also raise an outcry with sources like Facebook and Twitter and Google. And Twitter is actually doing a better job of, to be honest, of identifying and flagging fake news. It's all manual and it's imperfect, but there is an effort. And the problem is if we just give up, the internet becomes a very disgusting place. And if we're going to make the world a better place for everyone, we still have to work on raising our voices and saying, hey, this is, look at the information that come out. Like, for example, this medicine is going to cure COVID. That's complete BS, and you know that. And because that was such a unified effort, there was all sorts of little initiatives, like by hosts, like Netlify, and then like there's also like all these domain registrars, GoDaddy and Namecheap. All of these people like got together and made an effort to shut down these fake news sites, and we can help with that by profiling who's spreading it and raising public outcry.
What about websites like Snopes? Do you recommend those?
You know, it always depends on, it's always people. Like, we are so dependent on people. We're so dependent on the people running Wikipedia and dependent on people running Snopes that their information is accurate. I do encourage using these sites, but also understanding how these sites work and who owns them, and always follow the money. Who's funding this? Why do they want to fund it? Sites take effort to operate. A lot of content online is actually sponsored content. There are very few people in the world who try to blend their commercial interests with the ethical good. And if you do find people like that, you should definitely use them. But you have to be very conscious that at any point, any source you have really may or may not be trusted. And these are the bastions of free speech and democracy and anonymity and press freedom we have on the internet. We need to support them with funding. We need to promote them, promote the use of them. If you don't fund them, buy their merch. Join causes like, if you're interested in InfoSec, do join conferences and join groups. And try to make it easier for other people, because we often forget, especially all the people who work in tech, how we think all of this stuff is. I find it really hard to simplify such complex issues in a talk like this, but we're still trying, because we know that the next generation is going to be entering a world where the reach of cybercrime, hate the word cyber, but is unprecedented. So, that's really the point.
Okay. Can we move on to the question and answer portion?
Sure,
okay?
but I'd like to add one thing on fake news.
Okay.
You can just do a quick URL Google search or DuckDuckGo search, DuckDuckGo, sorry, on a particular site or URL, and you can see if it's like legitimate or not. And it's quite interesting to note that in research, next to the US, the number one source of disinformation and fake news is actually the Philippines. So we do have to be wary of it. And in fact, the Philippines was actually patient zero for a testbed of disinformation, whether it's from other countries or within as well. So just you can look it up on Google, go to Wikipedia, look at search like list of fake news sites, and you can find easily what is real and what is not. And I think just a little bit of diligence and not be so lazy and just take everything, that's probably the best thing somebody can do if they're worried about that.
Thank you. So are you guys ready to answer these questions?
Sure.
So how do I erase personal information on the internet that I've posted over the years? Is it is it even possible?
That's so one of the unfortunate things is I think when something is online, it's very hard to get rid of it, which is why I really advocate for, if you can avoid posting it in the first place, avoid posting it. It's like the same question of like, if I accidentally delete a file, is there a way for me to get it back? The best solution to that is also backups, right? But in the event that there is information that you've posted online and you want it to be taken down, again, it depends on what kind of information that is and where it's posted. If it's personally identifiable information, and if it is like, for example, photos of you or like your personal information, a number of sites will have some kind of privacy policy or some kind of policy about that sort of information. So you can sort of try to get it pulled based on that. As an example, Reddit, just as an example, no, has policies about doxing, about disclosing other people's identities. They have a very, well-defined policy about that. That is a basis by which you can have that pulled. But, one of the difficulties about the internet is, and about digital media specifically, is it enables people to copy information very quickly. So one of the unfortunate things is if you pull down one copy, a person can very quickly, copy paste that, post it somewhere else, and now you have another copy. There is some legislation, for example, that's happening, like in France, for example, they made legislation called like the right to be forgotten. And what this means is that you can ask Google to say, hey, I don't want people to know this thing about me. I think it was like about this guy who did some public mistake. He did something stupid and he didn't want that stupid articles about that thing he did to show up on Google, right? So he was able to ask Google to pull down those articles based on that legislation. But that's not really useful here because you don't have that kind of legislation. So yeah, is there something that the rest of the panel wants to add on that topic?
Yeah, sure. You can do it. It's very painful. It'll take at least a couple of weeks for you to do it because you have to delete your Google, Facebook, emails, whatnot. Let's say you really want to disappear from the internet. It's possible. It does take a lot of work. One thing I can share though is if you've subscribed to most of these services with an email address, for example, you can use this service. And I know these guys and they're legit. It's called dc.me. Now, all you got to do is put your email in and it will show you where and what you've actually used as a service with your email address. And with one click, it could help you delete everything. Of course, change your password before you use that service. But it definitely does help, makes it a lot easier. You can then go to Google and then wipe out your entire history and profile from them. That's also possible. And you can do the same with Facebook, a little bit harder to do. And again, the same with Twitter. Aside from that, I think it's also possible. It's all hidden in the back end, but it's all possible because it is by law now in most countries.
Also, a lot of people use the same username, so you can also add to what Miko said. Try out namecheck.com, looking for identities here, posting it.
It also, I think this question will also depend on, the nature of the information that you want removed. So for example, if it's your own posts, if it's stuff that you yourself published and it's on your accounts, definitely what Miko said does apply. You can delete all of these accounts. You can, once they're gone, after a few weeks, you can ask Google to delist them from search results, etc. But if it's people posting stuff about you, that may be a different topic. And it again really depends on the sort of nature of the information that you want not to be pulled. But I think Miko gave a very good overview of stuff that you are in control of published stuff.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the other questions? And if we're going to answer it, like, please do so really quickly because there's like a lot of questions.
Okay.
Which programs are safest for holding online seminars? Like this one.
Well, obviously, yeah, go ahead.
That's very tricky.
Yeah. It depends really on what you mean by safe. Safe as in secure, safe as in safe from people who want to troll and bomb your videos and all of that. Obviously, like right now, we're using Zoom. Zoom hasn't really had the best track record, but we're using Zoom because, we paid for certain features. We made sure to use the invite functionality and have the registration form. We made sure that we're very careful about the settings and only hosts can mute and unmute people and all of that. So honestly, it's I think if it comes to like being safe about what participants can post and all of that, I think it's a matter of like looking at the tools and making sure that it has the features that you want and that you use these particular features and they are set up correctly. So even though Zoom doesn't have the best track record, we're using it anyway because of that. But on the flip side, if you're actually doing something, if your concern is not participant behavior, but more of like actual information security, maybe not Zoom because they have a record of like, passing data to China, even though it's not necessary. There's also talk about for free accounts, they won't enable end-to-end encryption, which is crazy in my opinion, but there it is. That's how they make money.
Channel is unsafe.
Yeah. So again, it depends on that safe. For the first kind of safe, which is participant behavior, I think anything will work as long as you look at the features, know how to use the features, and the features are available to control that, to control behavior. If you're talking about safe as in security, maybe, I don't know if one of the panelists have a suggestion other than Zoom?
I would employ the techniques used earlier, not using your home network. You can, if you want, if you're trying to hold a webinar, you're trying to keep anonymous. I mean, technically, you could use a voice changer. You could, of course, not have video. And you can employ all the techniques that we mentioned earlier. You could don't use a network, which can be traced back to you.
Yeah. Again, it really depends on what you mean by safe.
Yes.
Red suggested Jitsi, so that's another thing that you guys can look into. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. How can I protect myself and my family from doxing?
Yeah. So again, a lot of the advice we gave earlier about if you can avoid not posting it, then don't. If you want to voice specific opinions but don't want it linked back to you, then have a different account for that. And again, all of the advice we gave earlier about segregating that and using a different device. Pepe's adding some information here, like if you can avoid putting information about relationships online, then avoid doing so. And this is because sometimes it's not necessarily you that they can dox. Maybe, as an example, I'm very careful about the information I post about myself, but maybe my mom is not. And if you know who my mom was, you can find out their information and their address, and then you can find out my address. So that's one thing. Again, a lot of the things mentioned, if you can avoid uploading addresses, contact info, don't. The thing I just mentioned. Is there anything the rest?
I guess that's just like digital hygiene we've talked about in part 1 and yeah. So next question is there a more secure way to get load without having to give my cell phone number to tindahans?
You could not use them. You can use, Gcash and Paymaya both have load functionality. There are also load gateways online, but you have to trust these load gateways. There are also apps that do loading. I've seen ads for a couple of them, but I can't remember their names, but you can find them naman. There's also the old school and most safest ways to pay cash for those load cards that you can get. It's super hassle, but it's completely not digital, so it's actually the best way to get load without giving your number to anyone. Pero yun nga, you have to do the stupid scratch this thing, type in the code.
You're also assuming that's your number. A lot of people do. It's actually quite cheap to send mass SMS. So you're likely not being targeted specifically.
Yeah. So, again, Gcash, Paymaya online, or use load cards. or ask a friend to pass a you load. None of these are great solutions, but again, just a matter of where you want to protect yourself.
Okay. Any recommendations for browsers?
Uh,
Or you guys
we've
don't
talked
like?
about this. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've talked about this.
Microsoft
You know,
Chromium.
yeah.
If Firefox and so, but better than don't avoid using Chrome and all the others.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
top 3 would be.
I would just use Edge right now.
Okay.
Maybe
Cool.
Edge again depends on.
Your
Very, very frustrating, right? Edge, I think, would be the most secure from vulnerabilities. Like, for example, something like if you click a link and there's some malicious JavaScript that tries to escape the sandbox. I realize that sounded like a lot of gibberish, but for some people. But in terms of security, Edge is very secure. But it depends. Is your priority security or privacy? Because if it's privacy, I would actually go with Firefox. But ironically, Firefox is less secure from those kinds of vulnerabilities than Edge is. So I would actually say go between Edge or Firefox, depending on what you're trying to protect against more, whether that's security as in vulnerabilities or privacy as in information disclosure.
Okay.
Yeah, and then a lot of what we discussed. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, the last thing I will say is, again, be very careful about the extensions you install also. Some of these extensions are good for your privacy and your security, but some of them are also bad. I talked about ad blockers, trackers, privacy possum and badger. Those are good, but make sure that you're downloading trusted extensions from the right place and that you're not downloading random extensions, because that can actually compromise even a good browser. Sorry, please go ahead.
Just like to make an important distinction. Microsoft Edge Chromium, the new one. Yeah. The old Microsoft Edge has zero security and zero privacy. Stay away from that. Make sure it's Edge Chromium, okay? Very important.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. Should we avoid Android phones that show ads such as Xiaomi? Also, I think there's a Chinese company, was it Huawei, that had security issues?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the advice that we give earlier, look who's paying for it. And if there are ads on the device, that's usually a bad sign. It's difficult because, it's one thing to say that, picking a good device is important. For example, Apple likes to make a big deal about privacy, and that's why their devices are expensive, because they don't sell your data, and maybe you believe them or not on that point. But ultimately, it's important to do your research, right? It's important to look at the ties behind these devices. It's funny that the ad-laden phones were given as an example, because one of the things that I can share is that I once had to buy one of these really cheap phones for a friend because they needed the cheapest phone. And I regretted it because I could not find a way to get rid of the ads. I rooted the phone. I deleted a ton of services. I'm like, yeah, great. And then when I turned it on and off, they were back. And I was like, oh my God, I want to throw this phone into the fire. That said, it's very difficult to say. We wouldn't specifically mention, again, specific brands or models. Because again, even a good phone, if you put bad software on it, you would still be compromised. I think the best thing really, as was mentioned previously, is to really look at the money and look at the interests around the people around that phone. Good example, one thing, ads is a really good example, because without disclosing anyone, I was actually, I heard something about someone trying to make their own phone without mentioning any names now, and they wanted to put ad software on it, and they wanted to specifically do things like, target people based on what apps they used and based on what actions they take. So it is important to look at those relationships and look at the incentives around that. Does the rest of the panel want to add anything?
I think it's already 5 o'clock. So let's answer the last question. What are other InfoSec groups or pages do you recommend? So maybe you guys can send people links to what they can, like where can they go if they want to learn about digital security, information security more?
I think one very good group, they're actually an advocacy group. They're registered as like an actual nonprofit org, is the EFF, or the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They even do stuff like, they also have lawyers, for example, that deal with like information-related cases. No? And at EFF.org, a lot of the advice that we give is actually based off a lot of the guides that they provide. They have a lot of PDFs, pages, etc., regarding a lot of topics. So that's one of the places that I would actually advise you guys check out. There were also a bunch of links shared previously around digital hygiene that was shared previously. I think we'll just try to...
We've sent it out to
Yeah.
people registered in part 1. So they
Right.
should have
So
the links there.
we will share that again. The rest of the panel, do you have any other to add?
I don't know, the other DEFCON groups.
Yeah.
Look for the DEFCON group in your area. And for the first time, DEFCON's going to be online this year. It's safe mode with networking. Some people also like Black Hat, but it's more corporate. So if you're more of a hobbyist, probably DEFCON is more your speed. We encourage participation from other cities in the Philippines, so we're waiting for someone to start DEFCON Cebu. So I'd love to, if you need help starting your own DCG, please reach out to us.
So DEFCON Manila is on Facebook, right? And you have a meetup.com page as well. So those links were already sent for the summary for part 1. We'll also send those links for the summary for part 2. Yay! Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. I will also be sharing a copy of the notes that I was typing out as the session was ongoing, so that everyone can just look at it.
Yes, please, and the slides.
Nice. Well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's helpful.
Oh no, thank you guys for coming and for listening, and we hope that you'll share the information here with your friends and family who might need it.
Please.
Are DEFCON on social media?
Oh, that's excellent. You started a security talk in your company, right, Jill? That's amazing. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that's great. Yeah.
You can
Again,
share
yeah.
the video with them if you want, or
Yeah,
some of
actually,
the
please.
tips.
Oh, yeah. So join us on Meetup. You can join the Meetup group at meetup.com/DEFCON. And also, even though Facebook is very, very questionable, a lot of the Philippines is still on Facebook. So also, we're DEFCON Manila on Facebook.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
When is the DEFCON online event that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I want to check
In
that.
August. That's in August. Or first week.
Awesome.
So there are two, DEFCON China and DEFCON Vegas.
DEFCON China.
I have many questions about the idea of a DEFCON China.
China?
Good luck. Good luck, brave people.
We're so dead.
I think DEFCON China is going to be really interesting.
I think, isn't DEFCON China in the Philippines? I'm kidding. Just a joke.
Too close to home,
I
literally.
don't know.
Hold the fuck up, wait.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah, Miko's site actually has a ton of security articles that delve into this more. So you can check out pangolin's.com.
Thanks.
Thank you.
DEFCON in Vegas, for the first time, is going to be online, so you don't have to pay for an expensive plane ticket to go to Vegas. It's August 6 to 9, and
Nice.
you can visit defcon.org.
6 to 9.
I
Interesting.
would really not
Nice.
trust anyone that you meet. Do not trust anyone there. Please don't. I mean, participate, but also use all your burner emails. They're just looking for people to help.
Yeah, the DEFCON people attracts a certain type of audience.
Oh no.
They're nice. Don't ask questions.
So I guess you guys can attend, and then we'll just wait for your report.
No.
You're into doing your own research.
I want to
Yeah.
watch.
Oh my god. Yeah, just we always when we have meetups, we're just like, don't talk to anyone. Don't take pictures. Don't talk to your seatmate. We were practicing social distancing before. It was cool.
My God.
Hipsters, security hipsters.
No.
No.
There are many hats in the world.
Nice.